listening to episode 177 of Mitolife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, and today, Jason Hommel returns to the show. He's the author of the book, The Copper Revolution, and lately he said he thought about switching the name to the Copper-Zinc Revolution because these two minerals work together in a really powerful way. In the last 2 years, a lot of people have been taking only zinc, ascorbic acid, and vitamin D, and none of the other things that balance those out. Now, I still don't recommend vitamin D, neither does Jason, but with the other two that I mentioned, those are balanced out simply by taking copper, which he advocates. And he doesn't sell a copper supplement. He recommends making it yourself using copper sulfate dissolved in a 2-ounce dropper bottle. And that way you can make a bottle with over 1,000 milligrams for 3 cents. So right there, that knocks out two arguments that he might be biased because he's selling a copper supplement, or the other argument that it's too expensive and supplements are expensive. Both of those are shot down with what he talks about. So if you haven't heard the first interview that I did with Jason, I highly recommend going back and listening to that one on the myth of copper toxicity, because that brings some context to this discussion about the mineral zinc, because you can't talk about zinc without talking about copper. And as far as I've heard in lectures, podcasts, books, not a lot of people delve into the relationship between copper and zinc. And it was experience that taught Jason, because when he was high dosing copper, 30 milligrams orally, 70 milligrams transdermally with the copper sulfate, he found that he created a zinc deficiency, which will happen if you are upping your copper. So a lot of people are confused about how much to take of supplements, and it really comes down to how much you're taking of their counterpart and or how much you've been dosed with. And they have dosed people very heavily on vitamin D and calcium. And Jason and I are on the same page there that we should not be supplementing vitamin D or calcium. And he also recommends against other supplements, which he talks about in this show. But on the topic of zinc, we talk about metallothionein, which is a protein in the liver that gets upregulated when you start consuming copper or zinc. He talks about the RDA for zinc, the health benefits of zinc, the copper-zinc optimal ratio, how zinc can actually help us absorb more copper, the connection with zinc to vitamin A, the digestive benefits of zinc, how to test it if blood tests are accurate. And we also talk about iodine, selenium, and vitamin C. And at the end, I ask him listener questions, including the best time of day to take zinc. Does it help with loss of smell? Does it help with hair loss? What's the best form? Does zinc increase sperm count? Does zinc in sunscreen affect your zinc status? Are white spots in the nails a sign of zinc deficiency? Is the zinc test, tasting it in your mouth, if it tastes metallic, is that an accurate way to determine whether your body needs it or not? Best food sources of zinc, and why someone might get a headache from taking zinc. This was a really fun show, and it helped connect a lot of dots for me, and hopefully it does for you as well. Here is Jason Hommel. All right, Jason Hommel, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. It sounds like we're going to have another good show today.
Yeah, the first one was really fun, and people really enjoyed that because there's a lot of information out there about zinc, which we're going to talk about today, but not a lot about copper. And what I found fascinating is looking into the relationship between those two minerals lately and how they're kind of joined at the hip, right? I mean, you could just slam your body with copper all day long, but as you said on your group, you'll just deplete your zinc if that's not coming in.
That's right. I mean, that's right. I mean, I tried it Morley's way. As I was finishing up writing my book, he convinced me to try a lower amount of zinc. Before I get into that, I want to just say how much zinc I'm taking, and I got to ask you how much zinc you're taking. I'm taking anywhere between about 50 to 100 milligrams of zinc a day, and I'm taking about 30 milligrams of copper a day, and I'm applying about 70 milligrams of copper to my skin. So I'm trying to find a balance between those two, going back and forth. But yeah, just right about there. How much are you taking?
Yeah, so I'll just preface this with I think since our last interview, that's when I started applying copper primarily topically, but I was taking it orally as well. And I think for the last, I don't know, 5, 6 weeks, I forget how long our last show was ago, I was taking roughly 20 milligrams orally, usually bisglycinate. And then I was applying to my skin. I think I calculated it was about 100 milligrams. It was a significant amount, and I was feeling good.
Wow. Okay. Yeah,
Um, but
that's great.
and I know we
Okay.
only absorb, we don't absorb all of that. So um, I don't know, it's
Right.
probably
Right.
getting 50, 60, 70 milligrams. But I posted in your group. It was funny because I was visiting my dad in California and my hands turned blue, and my mom was freaking out, and she's like, "Is that permanent?" I'm like, no, don't worry about it. I'm just trying this new thing. And then he said, rub ascorbic acid on your hands. And so I broke a capsule in my hands, rubbed it under their filtered water, and that immediately took out the color. But what's interesting is the very next morning, I woke up and my hands were bright red. It looked like
I saw that.
Sedona, Arizona rocks. Like, and so, and you responded, you said, take zinc. And so I had some of that. And so I started on that. And within a couple days, I mean, within the first day, it started to fade. And so that really made me start to see the relationship between these minerals. And so I started on zinc, and I think I started at a very modest amount, maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 milligrams a day, maybe a maximum of 50. And then lately I've just been experimenting with higher doses. And I'm not just uh, shooting in thin air here. I got a full Monty iron panel recently, and my copper and zinc were not optimal. Um, I think I think they're supposed to be 100 or 120, and they're around 70. So I had both, I don't know, 60 to 70 range, and that's, I know there's plasma zinc, and the testing is a whole nother topic, but from what I understand, copper and zinc are only like 1% in the blood, and the rest is in the tissues, and so those tests aren't very accurate, right?
They're not accurate. And I wouldn't worry that your copper's a bit low because, first of all, there's almost no studies and data on people who are taking high copper. So we really don't know what is going to happen with what it's going to look like in our blood. But from the research that I have read, it shows that copper can be high in the blood during copper deficiency, during all sorts of copper deficiency diseases, from whether from inflammation or heart disease or whatever. And then they start to give copper to solve those problems. They have to give enough to work. Maybe, and the researchers that I have to guess at how much they use, maybe 6 to 10 milligrams at most, because they're all very super conservative. And then what happens next is that the blood copper goes up a little higher, and then it starts to cure the situation or disease or inflammation or heart disease or whatever, and then the copper comes back down. So at our high levels, it should come back down, and we might not have even average levels, because the other thing is that the body gets very efficient at processing and eliminating copper, which we're going to talk about a little bit later when we talk about metallothionein, because the body will make more of that, which helps to carry copper out of the body. So as the more copper you take, the more copper you will excrete, which goes to show that copper is not toxic and cannot be toxic until you overwhelm this excretion mechanism, which in rats happens at 5,000 milligrams a day or higher, 10,000 milligrams a day. And what is theorized is that the reason why they're able to sustain such a high level is, and why they get overwhelmed is that the rats start making a ton more metallothionein, which excretes the copper, and it's only when that whole system gets overwhelmed that then copper toxicity sets in. So that whole process almost refutes the entire concept of there being a copper toxicity by accident, because real toxicity happens at these extremely high doses, or in humans who take 20,000 milligrams of copper. So I don't fear what your Morley panel is showing, because again, those tests are not very accurate for copper. Now for zinc, it's a little bit of a different story, because zinc is very tightly regulated. And I don't know if high zinc could indicate low zinc like copper can, but when zinc goes low, you're definitely low, because uh, by that time you've bypassed your homeostatic mechanism or whatever. And I tested low zinc way back in oh gosh, what was it, 2016. And I started taking more zinc then. I also started taking more copper, because I was also a little bit low in copper, didn't know anything back then. I just, and that's really what got me started on the road to studying minerals so much. It was right around 2016.
Wow. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what year. I think it was 2018, 2019. I was slamming oysters because I was on this quantum health, Jack Cruz protocol. I've tried so many protocols over the years, and it was like naked sunbathing, grounding, sun gazing, and just tons and tons of seafood. And I felt pretty good. And I actually got a inside tracker like panel. I think it was 30 markers. And what was interesting is my testosterone was 1268. So it was over 1200.
From the oyster and zinc,
Yeah, I
that's
guess
right.
so. Right. Yeah, but I was probably low copper, so
Oh yeah, okay, right. Well, yeah, maybe. But young men are typically not low in minerals unless you've done really bad things like drink too much alcohol or something.
hmm. Yeah, and I'd like to talk about that. What depletes? And I think we had some people ask that. I think obviously sexual activity. That's usually what people think of zinc. I think Adam Bergstrom said
I
some
don't
interesting things.
know. I don't think you can really deplete. I don't think you can really deplete zinc from too much sexual activity. I mean, yes, it's all well known that semen contains zinc, but the amounts are so small. It's fractions of a milligram.
Yeah, I think I read that. Yeah, it's kind of like with women's menstrual bleeding and iron. It's like 1 milligram or less. Like you don't lose as
Yeah,
much as
it's
you
like
think.
not enough,
Hmm.
right?
Interesting. Yeah,
So, so
go ahead.
let's mention the RDA right here in the beginning for zinc, right? I mean, these are the basics. So, I mean, the RDA for zinc, I tried to get a handle on it. It's somewhere between 10 and 15 milligrams, and then the upper limit's around 40,
Okay.
but I take 50. So the reason, at least I got to the reason on why it's 40, and that is because over that, too much zinc can deplete copper, or around that. I guess some people have noted that zinc can deplete copper if you take as little as 25 milligrams of zinc, but so I find it interesting that the government has set it at 40. It can be a little high, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, and that's something I've been beating the drum on, thanks to Morley for the last 2 years. Is with this whole COVID thing, they've just been pushing. It's like zinc, ascorbic acid, vitamin D, and like
Yeah,
people are just
all
slamming
three will
those.
deplete copper,
Yep. Right.
right?
And
Yeah,
no copper's
I mean that's
coming in, right?
dangerous
And
that
that's
all three of those can. And nobody mentions copper for COVID, but I did in the book.
yeah, because if copper was coming in and those, I mean, vitamin D is pretty hard to mitigate, but if copper is coming in, then your body could balance out a lot, right? You've written about the interrelationships between what is it, iodine and vitamin C, and they all kind of work together.
They do. I take quite a lot of minerals and vitamins. Vitamin C is probably the vitamin I like the most. I love iodine as my second favorite mineral. Zinc might be my third. Copper is my favorite mineral, of course, but zinc's got a lot of good things going for it too. It does indeed help us boost testosterone. It helps improve sleep. Zinc eliminates allergies and histamine reactions and rashes, and almost all of those tie together because You need sleep for healing, testosterone for healing, and when you get zinc, it helps bring all those together. And if you can heal, then of course you're going to heal from things like rashes and uh, allergies and sinus problems. It's kind of funny. I used to think that, well, I don't have allergies. I just have a runny nose. But we should almost think of it as the same thing. You know, you don't have to be diagnosed with allergies to be low zinc. Uh, Runny noses can be just as bad. So nowadays, if I even just sneeze once for no reason, I probably need a zinc.
Yeah, recently I learned with that diamine oxidase enzyme, the DAO enzyme, like people are taking eating kidney or doing desiccated kidney because kidney contains the DAO enzyme, or I think you could just straight supplement that enzyme. But if you want to make it in your body, I recently learned that you need not just copper, like I believed for the last 2 years, but you need copper plus zinc plus vitamin
Plus
C,
zinc.
right? You need like multiple things. It's usually not just one thing.
Right. That's another thing we're going to get into. Yeah, quite a few of these, like metallothionein, you need quite a few ingredients to make it. Um, uh, but it's interesting how in the studies, even just taking a ton of copper will make the metallothionein creation go through the roof to deal with just the copper. And you'll need copper as an ingredient to make metallothionein, as well as zinc, as well as selenium and sulfur and protein. All are needed to make metallothionein.
Yeah, that was something interesting I found about your work is the metallothionein research because um, interviewing Morley, he's brought it up a lot. I think almost every show or every other show, and he often says that it binds copper 1,000 times stronger than zinc, and that's a really bad thing. Um, and it can be right, but what I didn't know is that it's also our is it our primary heavy metal detoxifier? That's how we detoxify heavy metals is via metallothionein, and it has a lot of different beneficial functions besides just depleting our copper.
Right. It doesn't just deplete copper. I have read researchers. Well, first of all, metallothionein is actually a family of metallothionein enzymes. It's not just one. And then the other is that I was just reading about zinc because I had to study for the show at least a little bit and learn a little bit more things. They don't really know exactly what all metallothioneins will do because A, there's so many, and just because they bind something doesn't mean that it's bound for excretion. Some researchers have described metallothioneins as storage proteins. Some of them describe it as transport protein, and others describe it as an excretion protein. So it can do quite a few different things. I mean, if you're transporting something, you're transporting it where? To a location to do something. So it can store it and it can, I mean, just like people call ferritin, right? Ferritin is, it's not iron, it's an iron binding protein and it's in the blood. So it's transporting it in the blood, but they call it a storage protein. Well, metallothionein could be a storage protein too. We don't really know. There's so many unknowns. We need to be a little bit more cautious when we say things, I think.
hmm Yeah. So going back, that's interesting. The RDA is 10 to 15 milligrams, which to me doesn't sound like enough. Just thinking about it, you said the upper limit is 40 milligrams. Um, but
Well, and what's interesting is that just on a carnivore diet, people can get 60 milligrams of zinc. And in oysters, if you eat plenty of oysters, you can get easily into the 100 to 150 milligram ranges for zinc because oysters are so ridiculously high in zinc. Um, yeah, it's amazing.
mhm. Do you think a lot of the people on the carnivore diet are copper deficient if they're just slamming muscle meats? Like there's a lot of people that are just eating steaks for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
I have seen pro copper people who were carnivore realize that their carnivore diets being so high in zinc caused copper depletion. And so the solution to the carnivore diet is copper, interestingly enough. And vegans might get like a tiny bit more copper, but not very much, but they also absorb slightly less. So almost the entire food supply is devoid of copper, whether you're vegan or carnivore. There's really no good food sources for copper except for liver. But yes, you're right. Carnivore diets can cause copper deficiency. Seen that again and again.
Wow. And even liver, right? Because it blew my mind. Like I haven't stopped thinking about it for a day since Morley said this. That farmer down in Texas did a liver biopsy of his cattle, and he found zero copper essentially in their livers. And they were looking to make a desiccated liver capsule product, which are super trending right now. And there was no copper in that animal's
Wow.
liver. And this very healthy farm. And to me, that's very
Wow.
scary because people are banking on these organ meats as being superior to, say, your copper sulfate solution that you recommend. They say that's synthetic, it's unnatural, it's isolated, wouldn't find that in nature. It would be more natural to get it from liver. But I just question, is it even in liver? Like, can you rely on that?
That's wild. That's wild. I can't believe that myself. But I mean, I know. I mean, there are a lot of things out there like glyphosate that is chelating the copper in the soils, and so the plants aren't getting it, and then the cows aren't getting it if they're eating, uh, grass that has been contaminated with glyphosate. So they could be copper deficient animals. In fact, in my book, one of the statements that struck me the most was that copper deficiency is the number one nutritional problem in all of agricultural animals. So it's not just in humans, and the fact that even our food supply is so low in copper, that explains why we're so low in copper. But I want to address the comment that you just made that, yeah, people think that, copper sulfate isn't natural or whatever. But it's important to remember that copper sulfate is merely a salt. SALT, it's a salt. It's no different than table salt. Chemically, a salt is a salt. If copper sulfate is unnatural, then don't ever salt your food. People think, oh, well, if it's organic and we can't absorb or inorganic minerals, well, that's nonsense. Iodine is inorganic. It's the inorganic form of iodine that's the safest kind of iodine. In fact, and copper sulfate is super safe because it's totally purified and it's been removed of contaminants. When they form copper sulfate and it grows as a crystal, the crystallization and growing process purifies the stuff so that it becomes literally pharmaceutical grade, 99% pure. It makes it pharma grade and food grade. So, if you buy a regular copper supplement that has all sorts of other binders in it, who knows what you're getting? But if you're buying copper sulfate and it's already 99% pure, purity is really where it's at.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you brought up something interesting, the organic versus inorganic minerals, because that's been something I've been meditating on for, I don't know, 7 years or so. And it's my understanding, like organic
Okay, wow.
minerals. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just a layperson, but it's my understanding that organic minerals are attached to carbon. So basically, they're bonded to carbon, and inorganic minerals are not, which doesn't make one better than the other. Um, but I am a fan of shilajit. I sell the resin I import from Russia myself, and that contains fulvic acid, which the plants use to uptake minerals. And so that's part of my mitigation strategy. If I go out and have a cheeseburger or whatever, is I just take like a gram of shilajit to get fulvic acid and try to balance out the food ingredients that I'm eating that probably weren't grown properly. So but yeah, it's interesting with the copper
Interesting.
sulfate. That's a
So
solution for farmers. Yeah, go ahead.
it is. Farmers do use that as like for their animals and for their crops and things like that. In fact, Bordeaux mixture is used applied on grapes in France. It's copper sulfate mixed with like a calcium. It's used as a pesticide and prevents people from eating their grapes because they taste sour on the outside of the skin or whatever. And it ends up in the wines and kind of explains the French diet uh, paradox, why they eat high fat diets and yet at the same time they're healthy and don't get heart disease because the copper prevents heart disease. So that's an interesting connection there. You did mention, so if there's a carbon atom, it's an organic. So if you look up malachite, malachite is copper attached to a carbon atom, and it one of the historic uses or sources for copper was crushed and powdered malachite. Cleopatra is known to have used crushed and powdered malachite for her eyeshadow, of all things. It'll probably also reduce some puffiness. As you know,
Wow.
copper's great for the skin.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Since our interview, I got some malachite, and I'm thinking I might
No,
put it on my walls in my bathroom since I'm doing a lot of cool stuff in my bathroom area. Just like make a
oh,
copper
wow.
room, you know.
That would be luxurious and beautiful.
It's yeah, minerals are fascinating. How they all
They're
have,
amazing,
different
amazing.
crystals have different minerals. But yeah, so back to zinc. We could talk about copper all day, which is which is fascinating, and
I know,
they're
right?
connected, right? One thing,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
burning question I had for you is like, and I asked this question in your group, um, and it's a confusing one, but the ratio, like I went down this rabbit hole of just looking at PubMed studies of the zinc copper ratio, and I think I posted a few in your group, and it was basically saying that the ideal was a 1-to-1. Um, when they're looking, I guess, in the blood, right, which we already said is not a
Right,
complete picture. Um, but just
right.
seeing how that translates to, I think what you said is when you supplement, the ratio should be like what, no more than a 15 zinc to 1 part copper, which is really different from the 1-to-1. So I'm just wondering where, like, wouldn't the supplement have to be 1-to-1 to create that 1-to-1 ratio in our body? I'm just kind of wrapping my head around that.
I think that's a very great question. So I have tried also to figure out the answer to that question for years, and it was only recently that I had heard that the person who originated the 15-to-1 ratio, I guess, was Carl Pfeiffer, and he was an anti-copper advocate, an advocate of copper toxicity. But he did recognize, I guess, that we do need some copper, and I guess he recognized that zinc could deplete copper. And I guess at the 15-to-1 ratio, I've tried to look for the rationale for that ratio that we see everywhere. And the only best rationale that I can find is that if you don't take any copper, it's a huge problem. And that if you take some copper, the 15-to-1 ratio might be enough to mitigate the zinc inducing a copper deficiency. In other words, that is the upper limit of an appropriate ratio. And if you go above that, you're going to be in trouble. So 20-to-1, you're going to probably be in copper deficiency. And in fact, what we found, I think we mentioned this on the first show, is that a woman ate 5 years of nothing but oysters and developed copper deficiency. And I looked into it, and the oysters have a ratio of about 15 to 18-to-1 zinc over copper. They also have a bunch of other toxins, which makes them a non-kosher food because they're bottom dwellers. And I don't like oysters for that reason. I also don't like liver because liver is just disgusting. But um, that indicates that that's a very bad rationale. Okay, that basically that would be an absolute minimum for copper. It doesn't speak to what would be an ideal amount of copper, which of course would be an entirely different ratio. So some people have said, well, the 15-to-1 ratio is bad. We've recognized it as bad, so therefore an 8-to-1 is better. Okay, well, that's a good first step in recognizing that the 15-to-1 ratio is bad and can pretty much lead to copper deficiency, and it doesn't really solve the problem. So, but why did they only go to 8-to-1? There's no specific rationale there either. And the only rationale that I can find is that because people are still, by and large, terrified of copper toxicity, and they don't know a thing about copper. So the amounts that I was taking, I actually inverted the ratio and I went all the way, 100 milligrams of copper and only 10 milligrams of zinc. And I discovered that no, after a few months of that, and I did that on purpose when I was writing the book, as I was finishing up the book, because I wanted to figure out, I wanted to maximize copper. I didn't want the zinc to hurt it, but I realized that led to some symptoms of zinc deficiency. So I bumped up the zinc to about 25 milligrams. That solved some of my own zinc deficiency problems like low libido and some, but I still had that dry skin problem. I bumped it up again to 50 milligrams, um, and I was having some sneezing. And I'm like, it must be springtime allergies. And then I bumped it up to about 100 milligrams of zinc, and all of the allergies went away immediately. And I was like, oh, I'm so much better. I'm no longer an allergic. And I realized, yes, these allergies, we're all told, oh, well, I'm not an allergy person. That's my brother's problem. So It's not me. But look, if we're sneezing and we're having a runny nose, that's allergies. You don't have to wait for a diagnosis from a doctor, and it doesn't take a rocket science to know that you're sneezing and you're having a runny nose problem. If you're sneezing and you're having a runny nose problem, that's really a problem of low zinc. Take the zinc, you'll feel better almost immediately.
Yeah, and that's
That's how it
incredible.
works.
Uh, I grew up sneezing like I was a very sick child. I mean, my parents did best they could, like all of our parents, but I just remember being severely allergic to dust, where I would just sneeze for 10 minutes if I had one whiff of dust. If people were cleaning the house or whatever my parents were. And um, I was probably zinc deficient my whole life. I mean, that's been what I've been thinking about the last several months is, what nutrients was I not getting for the first like 3 decades of my life? It was probably multiple things.
Right, right. It's interesting you say this. Allergies were a problem for me about, maybe 15 years ago. And I was in the precious metal newsletter writing business, and another precious metal newsletter writer, he said, Jason, you got to look into chelation. Chelation's where it's at. Chelators, they can, reverse heart disease and pull the calcium out. And I had heart disease, and we can get the word out about chelation. You have to get the word out. So I tried some chelation, and sure enough, it helped my allergies because chelators, and this is a very interesting topic, chelators remove a lot of toxins, but they also unfortunately remove a lot of our good microminerals like copper and zinc. So what's the interesting thing is that the problem of chelators is actually the solution, because copper itself is probably the best natural chelator out there. People know that chelation should be working. They know that it's a problem because it eliminates minerals. Minerals are the best chelators. Copper creates so many different detoxifying enzymes, and so does zinc, because zinc makes the metallothionein, which is a chelator of all the other toxins. So all these autistic kids or have mercury problems or whatever, it's zinc and copper are the solution. But part of the problem is in copper deficiency, they test high with copper in the blood. So they all think they're copper toxic, which is leading them away from the exact solution. So there's just this learning curve of getting past this counterintuitive nature that copper can be high in the blood during copper deficiency. That is the key factor and the hardest thing to understand.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up chelation because the whole detox thing is still, trending, and people are always looking for the latest and greatest supplement to chelate their heavy metals out and do a heavy metal detox, right? But you get to search zinc, cadmium, and there's tons of studies showing how zinc actually will chelate cadmium, and same thing with magnesium and copper, right? They all chelate different heavy metals out of your body. It's like we don't need to micromanage and like take these crazy supplements to try to like get it out. Just fulfilling our mineral needs, right, will allow our body to naturally excrete these heavy metals that are just coming in every which way.
Well, the other thing is that the copper toxic advocates, they recommend zinc and vitamin C in order to lower copper, and they get pretty good results. Why? Because zinc is an excellent, excellent mineral. That's why, and so is vitamin C. Both of those are also very strong detoxifiers. And if you're detoxifying all these toxins that are creating all of the problems, you're going to get significantly better. Um, it's the drawback of them failing to acknowledge that they need a lot of copper too as an additional detoxifier. They would get even better results because they're all just misled by the high copper in the blood problem.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you shared your story about high dosing copper without the zinc, because I think you did it longer than me, but I did that for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And I guess I could share the story here because I haven't said it on my show.
Yes,
The
do it.
first time I
Yes.
experimented with high dose copper was mid interview with a frequent guest, Adam Bergstrom, that I've had on the show multiple times. And we were 2 hours into the interview, and that's a long time. So I felt like I was starting to hit a wall. So I grabbed my copper sulfate here on my desk and just started rubbing it on my hands as I was listening to him and talking with him. And I think I ended up rubbing on like 15 dropperfuls within like 10 minutes. I just kept rubbing it on my hands. And this
Wow.
nausea
Okay.
kicked in.
Sounds like you're gonna pick me up. Okay. Right. No. Yeah.
I was just like, I want to see if this works, you know, and I started to feel this like nausea, which I never get with anything ever. And it only lasts like 45 minutes or so. And I just push through it. You know, I just keep the interview going. And when we get to the 3 hour mark, I just get this second wind and this boost. And I just felt like I could go another 3 hours. It's like, okay, wow,
Oh,
there's
right. When the
something
copper kicked in. Right. Right. After
right.
the
Hmm.
nausea. Right.
Hmm. Yep. And
That's great.
yeah, yeah. And I think I was applying about that amount. Because I'm a relatively healthy guy. Like, I think I could experiment pretty safely. I don't, recommend it to people, on the internet off the bat. I say just this is what I'm doing, not recommending it. And it's very clear with that. Um, but what I noticed, like you said, the symptoms, I noticed dry skin, like my hands are very dry and my sleep quality was going down. And maybe libido too. And yeah, then when I added in zinc, it just felt like I was myself again. It's like, oh wow, this is
Excellent. Yeah. That's great. So there's a guy in my forum who just today mentioned, the copper nausea problem. He said, well, I took a zinc the night before, and then I tried to take copper in the morning in a way that would make him give me nausea. And he said I had no nausea at all. So it could very well be that the nausea problem is a low zinc problem.
interesting. Yeah, I'm really curious with the upper limit with zinc. This morning I read in some biohacking group, they showed a picture of Dave Asprey and they were saying he looks so old, and and someone commented that he's like big biohacker guy, anti-aging, wants to live to like 150 or something. And someone commented and said that he recently made a comment that he thinks his hair went gray from high dosing zinc. But
That probably
maybe
did.
right, because it's the balance,
Yeah.
right? Because if you have both zinc and copper coming in the right balance, your hair is not going to go gray, and it could reverse actually, right? Even with zinc coming in. But if all you have is zinc coming in, then you're going to have
Then
that
that's going to
hydrogen
induce a copper
peroxide.
deficiency, and his hair's going to go gray. That's right. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny when you start
So I
talking about the
interesting.
vanity stuff. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So the interesting thing happened to me about 2 weeks ago. A doctor called me up out of the blue, and he thanked me so much for writing my book on copper, and we went over several issues that we've already talked about just now. And then he said, "Well, Jason, I'm good friends with Walsh of the Walsh Institute, who believes in and teaches this copper toxicity. And how can I, talk to him about it? And why is it that he's getting such great results with zinc and vitamin C, and what do you know about that?" And so we went over things and the gray hair and stuff. And he's like, "Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because Walsh is like has completely white hair and his face is very wrinkled, but he's old and in good health. So, I mean, once again, zinc is great and vitamin C is great. And maybe he's holding his copper deficiency at bay because with zinc and vitamin C, you're able to make quite a bit of collagen. Those are, two of the three big cofactors for collagen formation, but he still needs his copper, and he's probably induced a copper deficiency into himself because of his bias. So, but managed to stay healthy. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I bet most humans on the planet have some chronic deficiency that just goes unnoticed for their entire life, right? Or
I
multiple.
mean, it has to. I was in so many deficiencies back in my days when I was drinking alcohol, but I've been sober 10 years now, so yeah, I'm doing pretty good.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I guess I want to make this point too, like the food only people versus like there's kind of like a camp that just says, you're gonna imbalance the body if you take supplements, especially isolates, and so don't overcomplicate life. Just eat whole foods. But I mentioned earlier, right, the potential uh, liver problem, the beef liver being devoid of copper, and I think people just don't realize. I mean, you mentioned glyphosate, but there's NPK fertilizer, there's acid rain, there's biosludge, which they're dumping on farms. they're watering it with chemicalized tap water. And just our whole foods are not good enough, and that's very triggering for a lot of people, right? I mean, there's still, we have to eat, they're still worth eating. There's better ones than others, but you will induce deficiencies over time if all you eat is whole foods, right? And you take no supplements.
I agree with you, but our food supply only gives us about zero point 0.6 milligrams of copper or less for the average person. That's 80% of people, and that was a few years ago when they did that study. And it's been going down and down for quite a long time. You have to go back about 60 years, and most people got 5 milligrams of copper, which is now nearly, 1,000% more. Our recent ancestors who fought in World War II. People are like, well, we're different people today. I don't know if we could really even fight a World War II. Like, I mean, think of our younger generation who are called, what are they called? The okay, let's not insult them, so I don't want to say that, but they're called snowflakes, right? And yet our older generation who are now dying off, who fought in World War II, they stormed the beaches in Normandy when they were under fire. I mean, how badass is that? Every single one of those guys was equivalent of like a Rambo that we don't, that doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, it's crazy the changes, right? And so we need copper and zinc for testosterone production, and we just flat out don't have that. It explains the snowflakes and soy boys really clearly. I mean, these are big problems, societal problems. So people who would think, look, I'd love to live in the ideal world where I wouldn't have to supplement, but we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a very artificial world. I'm surrounded by bromine in the carpets and in the uh, bread supply and in the couches and in pajamas. We get fluoride exposure everywhere, even when we try to avoid it. Fluoride's in grapes, it's in all dried fruits, it's in Gore-Tex and Teflon pans. If you go to eat out and they cooked your food in a Teflon pan that you didn't know about, you're getting fluoride. If you drink water in a restaurant and you're traveling, you're getting fluoride. You just can't. I mean, they've said babies in the womb, freshly born, have a whopping 600 different toxins in their blood, known toxins that have been, categorized and they know are toxic. um, you know, Again, what was the thing I mentioned time and time again on our first show? We have like the average person has 5 substances in their body that all deplete copper, and then we all have them in our body at levels above copper. We are not in a natural world, and try to getting things naturally is just colossally stupid at this point. I mean, what is the whole environmental movement about? Because we know that there's toxins in the environment, and people are so stupid that in California they're banning straws rather than banning fluoride from the water. The Democrats who've gained power appear to be the most copper deficient. Let's put it that way.
You just blew my mind with the Gore-Tex piece. I For a short time I was folding clothes. I worked at the clothing department at a sporting goods store before I moved to the scuba department. And all the snowboarding, skiing outfits, the high end ones, $500 jackets, it's like Gore-Tex. And you just said there's
Well,
fluoride
that's right.
made. that's
It's all
that's
fluoride.
wild.
Yes. Well, I mean, if you just, it's one big string of fluoride molecules on there. I can't believe that stuff is even allowed to be used. And it's the same stuff that's used to make Gore-Tex, fluoride, it's in Glide dental floss. And there's a study in my copper book that shows that Glide dental floss is linked to lower IQ and brain problems. And the
Wow.
only way to like deal with that is to take inorganic iodine and inorganic boron and copper in large enough amounts to detox this stuff. Because the average person, and there are people above average and there's people below average, but the average person has 2,600 milligrams of fluoride in their bodies, and the average person is just on the verge of having skeletal fluorosis. The average person is on the verge of having skeletal fluorosis. That means if our society doesn't change things, majority of the people will soon be quickly having skeletal fluorosis if we don't change something. That's wild to me, but that's where we're at.
That is crazy. Yeah. Yeah. You got me interested in the iodine because I was taking that for several years ago, and I stopped because I got caught up in some fear articles about it shutting down the thyroid or something. But I like the nascent iodine, and I've been experimenting with 10 milligrams of boron a day, which I think you do 50 right, a day, which I haven't
I
gotten up
do
to
I
that
do up
level
to
yet.
100. Yes,
Wow.
yes, I do 100 milligrams of iodine, 100 milligrams of boron, 100 milligrams of zinc, 100 milligrams of copper. That's a good ratio. 100 milligrams of everything.
Well, what form of boron are you doing? Because I know the boron bisglycinate can get pretty pricey, right?
So the cheapest is borax, 20 mule team. Just a box. It's about $4. It will last you a lifetime. We take an eighth of a teaspoon of that in each of two morning coffees, and an eighth of a teaspoon has about 50 milligrams. One full teaspoon has a whopping just over 400 milligrams. A heaping teaspoon has about 600 milligrams. So if it's like piled high.
Oh, yeah. I think I've taken that orally a few times, but I mostly put that in my baths. That's pretty cool. Um, yeah, and earlier to the doom and gloom, just to give some light to what we were saying, I think the idea to me is to have more farmers, people that are doing it right. Like, it's not about spraying copper on the soil; it's about like putting it in the seeds. Like, so I think it's like soaking or spraying the seeds with copper sulfate solution, and not many
Interesting.
farmers are doing that. I'm putting up a growing dome here, like a little biodome here in North Idaho this year, and my idea is just to be the example, just to show, like, yes, even though I'm supplementing, we should be moving in some direction. Ideally, where we're creating nutrient dense foods that actually have copper. Um, when we're living in a copper desert world, we need to
What's
start making
interesting,
some
the
change.
copper toxicity people, they warn that too many farmers are using
Oh,
copper
really?
sulfate as an additive, an unnatural additive that's poisoning us all, which is just, again, wild to me. Not very many of them are, as you know. Uh, yeah, it's wild. I mean, there's so much to talk about with zinc. I want to mention one thing before it gets away from me, and that is some zinc actually helps us absorb copper. So they found that with like almost no zinc, less copper was absorbed. At 13 milligrams of zinc, more copper was absorbed, or the most. And then again, high levels of zinc, there's that counterbalancing low copper effect. And this was only on people taking the average of, say, zero point 0.6, or maybe it was, 1.2 milligrams of copper as a supplement. Um, we have absolutely no idea what the exact amount of peak absorption would be if we were taking like the heaping amounts of copper that we're taking, like 20 to 30 milligrams. It could be an entirely different number. We really don't know. We should just experiment.
I love it. Jason, have you looked into the half lives of copper and zinc, like the timing? Because I thought I read that
Yes.
copper is like what, 20 hours, or it was pretty long.
I think the half life of copper in the body is 22 days.
Oh, wow.
But most copper is metabolized within about 2 hours. And then, even though the half life is 22 days, the reality is like, so they do these studies over the course of a month or two. And what they have found was that in the first week, there was a lot of copper absorption. And then by like week 4, copper excretion dramatically increased because it takes a while for the metallothionein enzymes to build up and other copper excretion enzymes to build up. Then the body gets very good and it sort of catches up to the initial input of copper, and then almost all the copper gets excreted. So within 30 days, the body is excreting 90% or more of the copper that's being taken in, which is, again, another great example of why copper can't be toxic, because we learn to excrete it fast. It's almost like taking copper, we learn not only to excrete the copper, but we learn to excrete all the other poisons.
Does that also apply for zinc, Jason? Like, if you make it a zinc, like we talked about at the start, will you excrete a lot of it?
So I haven't seen anybody complain about zinc building up in the body, which is very interesting, like they do with copper. And I think copper only builds up in the body because copper gets attracted to other poisons. And so that really only happens in copper deficiency, that copper is building up because we need enough copper to detoxify the other poisons. Otherwise, the copper will be attracted to the poisons and stay there. So since nobody's complaining about zinc building up, I think the body probably just excretes it just fine. I was looking at, like, because you had told me you took 300 milligrams of zinc, I was looking and I had read that, over 150 milligrams and the 300 milligrams of zinc causes problems. So I wanted to see what those problems were. And it was very interesting. They said that pretty much the only problem is that it will deplete copper. That's the problem. And then they said that, and then here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. Then they said, and there's no antidote. Well, wouldn't the antidote be to just take the copper? It's so funny. So funny. They can't even figure that one out.
That's hilarious. Wow. Yeah, because if you
I
do the
know, right?
math, would it be 300 divided by, it's been a while since I've taught math, but 300 divided by 15, 20. Wouldn't technically, if we're going on a 15 to 1 ratio, you'd only need 20 milligrams of copper to balance out 300 milligrams of zinc?
And that would be if the 15 to 1 worked. You probably need to take about 40 milligrams of copper for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you also taking selenium? Because you mentioned you're taking pretty much everything, right?
Yeah, so funny thing is I haven't really started taking a high dose of selenium because selenium is a little bit expensive. So I just take the standard 200 micrograms. I have read, though, that selenium toxicity will kick in at levels 200 times higher than that, where a supplement manufacturer one time accidentally released a batch of selenium that was 200 times stronger than it should have been. And that's when people develop toxicity symptoms. I don't think anybody died. So selenium appears to be very safe up to that 40 milligram range, but I think it's just very expensive. So, you know me, I like the cheaper supplements.
Yeah, we need like a 20 mule team style of selenium. Wonder what that is.
Exactly, right? Yes.
Is there anything else you want to? I think you have a bunch of notes there, right, Jason? Any other subjects on the topic of zinc that you want to
There
cover?
are a couple of things I wanted to mention, and that is, first of all, zinc helps us make retinol binding protein. So zinc is actually the solution for vitamin A toxicity. And I looked into this whole vitamin A toxicity thing. I don't think it probably affects you because you're too young, but vitamin A can be bioaccumulative. And the theory goes that if the liver gets overfull of vitamin A, it then gets stored in the fat tissues. And if the fat tissues then get overfull of vitamin A, it starts coming out in the skin. And as a retinoic acid or as an acid, it starts causing things like rashes in the skin. And we were getting these really tiny little rashes, Jennifer and me, my wife. And so we decided to test the low vitamin A diet. And so we just had a lot of beans and rice, Mexican food, right? And sure enough, all of our rashes immediately stopped. And we're like, oh, really? So our problem is because we eat out a lot and we try to eat healthy and we're health nuts. We're like, oh, sweet potato, yay, more vitamin A, but it's in the safe form because it's beta carotene, no problem, yay. But it turns out that theoretically all of the beta carotene can get converted into retinoic acid because the beta carotene actually gets converted very easily in the presence of copper. And a beta carotene is really two retinoic acids bound together. So if it all gets processed, maybe we're overloading ourselves. And so it's interesting that zinc is great for rashes, and it binds to retinoic acid, which can cause rashes. So it's a very interesting link there. I mean, zinc is an antihistamine, but antihistamines, where are they released? They're released only in response to toxins. But zinc also eliminates the toxins. So there's a lot of interrelations there.
Yeah, and also acne, right? Like a lot of skin issues. Because I had it wasn't really severe acne, but it was maybe on a scale, 1 to 10, it was like a 6 or 7. It was, I had like a pimple on my face every single week, which was embarrassing and annoying. But that, from what I've seen, a lot of skin issues are caused by vitamin A deficiency, zinc deficiency.
Oh, deficiency.
Maybe copper plays a role there, but I know vitamin A and zinc for sure are have been used. They have Accutane, right? Synthetic
Right.
A
It's a
for
synthetic
acne,
vitamin
which
A
isn't
for the
good.
skin.
Yeah.
Right, right. So one of the things that my wife has read was that acne is largely a problem of fluoride, and that once you go through the fluoride detox, it's no longer a problem. And what happened to me in my mid 40s, I've never had acne on my back, but I developed this huge, huge acne in my upper back area. And it turns out that I was over consuming a lot of fluoride foods. And Jennifer clued me in. I was eating a lot of chicken, and it had a lot of fluoride. I was eating a lot of dried fruits. It has fluoride, especially raisins, which are grapes, which have a lot of fluoride. Um, and eating a lot of grapes and cherries, which are sprayed with fluoride because they don't want them to rot. So I was eating a lot of foods with fluoride in them, and that could have been responsible for me for developing back acne in my mid 40s of all. And so the first thing that I did was I started consuming potassium iodide because it's a much stronger form of iodine than just Lugol's solution. And I was able to get my iodine consumption up to 2,000 milligrams a day, which I did every day for about a year with Jennifer. And my first month on that, and all my acne problems, almost all of it, completely went away because it detoxes fluoride.
Wow.
And
You say
also, I was
2000.
doing the boron and the copper at the same time. So because I was doing several things at once to detox fluoride, all the acne problems went away.
Wow. You say 2000, was it milligrams or micrograms?
Yes,
Like,
that's right. No, milligrams, not a typo,
wow.
not a
Wow.
verbal typo. Thank you for correcting me. So Lugol's, you can only go up to about 100, 200, 300 milligrams, and it starts to like be real acidic and burns your eyeballs and things like that. So potassium iodide is a little bit softer and easier and gentler, and you can use that form to go up to 2,000 milligrams of iodine. But it's in the form of the iodide, which is because it's bound to the potassium. It's a little bit gentler on the system.
Yeah, I saw the post of your wife Jennifer. You guys painted her, you said head to toe in Lugol's iodine one day, right?
That, that was, yeah, we did that a long time ago. So that was Lugol's. And she actually developed a weird depression from that, which we solved with copper. And so then that kind of led me to think, well, why in the world was she depressed? Because iodine does not cause depression, but fluoride does. So did we stir up a ton of fluoride? Because we knew that was one of her problems from taking Prozac, which is a fluoride. And copper fixed it right away. The other great thing about zinc that I wanted to mention was that zinc, get this, just like copper, lowers iron. So there's two reasons why we no longer have to worry about, say, giving blood to lower our iron. Both zinc and copper will do it.
Interesting. Yeah, I just gave blood. I'm gonna keep experimenting with it just because it feels good. But I've been I just had my second one done, 2 months apart, and I didn't feel as energized as the first one. It was interesting, but that's I didn't eat a full meal before. I think that played a role. I didn't get a full night's sleep before the donation, but it does seem like a nice tonic to the body, as Morley calls it, to donate blood. Um, yeah. When's the last time you've donated, Jason? I'm just curious.
I, so I have a type 2 bleeding disorder. And so I think I've been identified as one of those people who can't give blood. And as a bleeder, right, I've been fighting my whole life to hold on to the blood that I have. So I'm not really so keen on wanting to give blood. I'm just glad that I haven't had any nosebleeds in the last 4 years. Um, I want to tell you one more thing about zinc that it did for me lately, and that is this: it helped me gain about 11 pounds. I've always considered myself a hard gainer in the gym. I go to the gym and I lift and I expect to grow, and growth never happens, and I'm just always stuck at 222 pounds. And the reason why I get stuck is because I start developing allergies. I get overfull in my stomach, digestion suffers. I don't feel like I can eat any more food. So, how can I gain weight if I can't eat any more food? I go to sleep and my nose is all congested, or I get allergies and I feel congested in my stomach and in my nose. And I'm telling people, because I'm writing, I'm in the forum and talking about copper all day long and how people need to also take zinc, and zinc is great for allergies. I finally put two and two together. Oh, this is allergies I'm having. So, this is a histamine reaction I'm having. So if I just take more zinc and that keep my nose clear and it will improve my digestion, does this mean I can gain weight without this problem happening now that I know the solution? So I've been taking more zinc and taking more vitamin C, and so very quickly I was able to gain weight without having all of these problems that were developing every single time I was trying to gain weight. Now, yes, a lot of this food is probably in my belly and I'm probably a little bit more fat than I should be. However, I don't have the symptoms that fat man has of the congested nose and difficult allergy problems. and I'm suddenly getting rapidly stronger in the gym, and that's the big thing.
That's awesome. Wow. It's interesting you brought up um, digestion because that's one thing that shocked me about zinc deficiency. Like I have a study here from the University of Munich, 2016, that just a minimal zinc deficiency impairs digestion, which is fascinating.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting. So one of the things we need zinc for is to make hydrochloric acid, and hydrochloric acid is basically our main digestive juice. So that's why that's important. But zinc is also a key factor in making collagen, along with copper and vitamin C. So this trio of zinc, copper, and vitamin C making collagen. Well, what are we trying to do when we go to the gym and build muscle? Muscle is 30% collagen. Collagen is what gives the strength to our fibers in our system. In fact, I was looking up bones for the copper book because I was thinking bones were mostly all calcium. The number one ingredient in bone is collagen. It's 35% collagen. It's not calcium. And the calcium has to go deposited into the bone, into somewhere, and it gets deposited into the collagen matrix that has to be there first. So we really need zinc and copper and vitamin C for our bones first before we need calcium.
Yeah, I think I read in the book The Calcium Lie, he listed like 12 minerals uh, that are a part of bone, and one of which was calcium, but it was like copper, zinc, magnesium. I think boron might have been in there. Like, it was a pretty significant
It's
list.
interesting. Big
People
list.
think just for yeah, just dairy for their bones and they're good, but it's like maybe
Right.
partly, but
And
other
in
things.
fact, if you just take a ton of calcium, and because calcium gets significantly overconsumed, calcium ends up blocking all the other minerals. It will start blocking the magnesium, and you need the magnesium to keep the calcium in solution. So what happens if you just take calcium, it doesn't even go into the bones because it needs all these other cofactors to get into the bones. And since it depletes all the other cofactors, calcium ends up precipitating out in the blood supply and creating things like arthritis, stiffening the joints, and it creates arteriosclerosis, and it creates kidney stones, all sorts of problems just from taking calcium supplements. So most people in the alternative health community say no to taking calcium supplements, but there's a lot more we really need to do. We need to take all these micro minerals. Zinc and copper, man, that's where it's at.
Yeah, and I think we're on the same page with not supplementing zinc and vitamin D too, right? Which vitamin D increases calcium absorption.
So that's right. I mean, I don't take vitamin D, but I do try to get out in the sun, and I will artificially tan in the winter if I can't take the time to sun and during the summertime.
And one other thing I found fascinating, Jason, is you don't you said you don't supplement magnesium because your theory is that you're retaining it with what is it, copper and boron, I think.
That's right. Well, I've taken magnesium because of the calcium problem pretty much for I don't know six or more years. So at this point, I mean, at some point, I have to be full of it, right? Right. So we decided to go ahead and temporarily stop the magnesium and see how we felt. I was expecting I would develop some sort of muscle cramps or something, and it never happened. Um, and I don't really crave magnesium, maybe. And there are problems with taking too much magnesium. It can deplete B1. And when people get depleted of B1 from magnesium, they can develop racing heart. And racing heart is a very common symptom and problem out there among people who are taking all the supplements to try to get healthy. And it could very well be from too much magnesium. So it does not mean that I don't think magnesium is good. I think I don't have a problem retaining it because I've got the copper and the boron. And magnesium is in the food supply. Calcium is in the food supply. I eat milk and eat greens and grains and meat. I have a very wide variety diet, so I'm getting magnesium. I don't dispute that magnesium's used for 3,000 processes, but if I'm not copper deficient and I'm not boron deficient, I probably don't have a magnesium wasting problem, and therefore I probably don't need to supplement it. I think we really need to supplement these minerals that help us detoxify. Again, magnesium is still a great detoxifier. Um, maybe I just don't need it. So I've decided to try to live without it, and we might go back and try some magnesium once a week just to be on the safe side. But I'm surprised that I haven't developed any symptoms that I could pinpoint at all from not taking magnesium.
Yeah,
I would have expected at least some symptoms.
That is interesting. Yeah, on the affordability side, the most inexpensive magnesium, because it's all magnesium is, I think, one of the most expensive minerals to supplement. But the cheapest one is making your own magnesium bicarbonate, and I've been, showing people how to do that for, I don't know, 6 years, and it's basically just magnesium hydroxide powder mixed with cold soda water, so carbonated water, and the reaction makes magnesium bicarbonate. So it's that liquid form. I think it's 50% absorption, and you just do shots in between meals, which that can create loose stools. I mean, when I was going too heavy on it, I was drinking a whole mason jar, 32 ounces, and that gave me diarrhea for days. So you have to like
Wow.
split it up
I'm
and
so
pace
amazed
yourself.
you say that. The next thing I was going to say, and this is one of the last things on my list, is that bicarbonate uses up zinc.
Oh wow.
So, and one of the symptoms of zinc deficiency is diarrhea.
It's all connected.
Yes, it's all connected. That's right. That's right.
That's
I thought
fascinating.
the show was going to be a lot more boring because zinc is such a mainstream nutrient. You go to the supermarket, grocery stores, and you look at the minerals. There's a zinc this, zinc that. Just zinc is everywhere. You won't find copper anywhere. So, do people really need to be encouraged to take zinc? You know, if they're on the high copper program, they certainly do need to be encouraged because there are voices out there discouraging us from taking zinc with copper. But I think zinc is important to take with copper.
Yeah, and I even wonder for someone like me that was vegan vegetarian for almost a decade, and most of my childhood I didn't like steak or ground beef. I was like a chicken nuggets kid and fish. I didn't like red meat for the first almost 30 years of my life. And so I wonder how much
Wow.
zinc I was getting for most of my life. It was probably very minimal.
You can get some zinc from beans, but if you're not eating any beans, then your zinc is going to be pretty low.
Hmm. Yeah, fortunately, I was eating a lot of bean burritos. I got to have Mexican food with my friends, just get a veggie burrito and living on those. Probably had other issues though
That's
in that
good.
thing.
What's really interesting is that vegans do suffer from zinc deficiency pretty typically, the zinc deficiency and B12. And one of the signs of that's associated with veganism is an anxiety problem. And zinc deficiency also creates an anxiety problem as well as a lack of joy problem. Um, it affects our emotions significantly. So I don't know if you experienced that when you were a vegan or not. You tell us. Did you have like a anxiety problem when you were a vegan at all?
Yeah, sorry, Jason, you were breaking up for a little bit. I think the connection's good now. But I heard your question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I definitely did. I was, somewhat antisocial. I never imagined having a podcast or like, I had to take public speaking classes and in college and do more presentations, and it took me longer than most to break out of my bubble and be able to communicate with other people. So yeah, I'd imagine that was largely a zinc deficiency, and it's probably linked with testosterone too, right? Because I felt like as my testosterone went up, so did my ability to communicate with other people.
It's amazing how it all ties together because, right, testosterone gives us the boldness that makes anxiety melt away. So it's very interesting that those two are related as signs and symptoms.
Hmm. Yeah, and you were saying you were trying a bunch of different forms of zinc, and you didn't really notice a difference. Like you tried gummies, and I know
I
there's what
didn't
picolinate
I didn't
glycinate.
try the zinc picolinate. I didn't try zinc picolinate. I guess that's been identified as one that's not as well absorbed. But yeah, I do a zinc glycinate and quite a bit, quite a few different brands. We're not very brand loyal. We just try to buy, supplements that are common and cheap, actually.
Yeah, because that's the main question I got from people for this episode. What brand? What supplement? They're just looking for a link, and people capitalize on that. I always assess people's financials, and I'm like, if there's priorities here. Like, I worked 3 jobs for years and was scraping by and barely making rent, and I get it. If you're in that place, it's like, yeah, 20 mule team borax, making your own magnesium bicarbonate, you know, um, copper sulfate.
It
These
adds
are
up.
very cheap
Yeah,
supplements. Hmm. Hmm.
that's right. It adds up. So you got to be cost conscious. I think probably one of the most expensive supplements we're taking is the MSM sulfur. It's about $20 or $30 that we go through almost every month. So the zinc that we buy, I mean, people are like, well, can I learn how to make the zinc by myself? Can I make the zinc sulfate? You can. You could just do the math and see what percentage of zinc sulfate is zinc and make it and dilute it into the dropper bottle just as you do the copper sulfate. But I haven't found it necessary to do that because the pills are convenient. And, a bottle of 250 pills of zinc is like $14 and it lasts me and my wife easily 4 months. So it's not really cost prohibitive to buy zinc at all.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing I'm still diving into is all the gummies are the form of zinc citrate, from what I found. And Morley's very anti-citrate because of its effect on ceruloplasmin, as well as ascorbic acid. But I know that CP slash ceruloplasmin can get too high, so I've been diving into that very heavily the last 2 months, and it's always a balance with everything, right? We don't want maximum as much as we possibly can get ATP because that could cause problems. We don't want maximum as high as we can get at ceruloplasmin, right? It's all in a balance. And even the activity level of ceruloplasmin, that needs to be in balance. Everything's in a range, right? We don't just want sky high everything. And so my point is, even if citrate has an effect on ceruloplasmin, I'm wondering if it's a balancing effect. Um, but that citrate compound is interesting. Have you delved into that at all? Like
I asked
that form?
Morley that question, the difference between citrate and citric acid, and he said, no, those are two different things. But, I think they're both found in an orange. So I think he's more against artificially made citrate, which is probably made via a fungal growth process in the manufacturing of it.
Got it. Do you want to go through some of these questions that we have, Jason? We have some good ones.
There's one
Or
last point I want to make about zinc, and it's
yeah,
sort of a dual point. It's very commonly known that zinc is good as a germ killer, and so, of course, is copper. And over the course of this interview, we've gone over all these different things that zinc does. It has a lot of overlap with copper about what it does. It makes collagen, kills germs, boosting the immune system, boosting hormones, detoxifying. Um, all of that is all very, very good. And more important than ratios is deficiency levels, really. And so, taking zinc and copper and vitamin C as a trio of supplements to start with, there's so many benefits. You'll feel so much better eliminating those as deficiencies. And the side effects of just increased collagen production alone is worth it. But then when you look at the synergy of germ killing and everything else and detoxification, it's really life changing when you add all three of those together. Especially because most people they only do like one or two; they don't do all three.
right, right. That's a good point. And uh, before the show too, I just wanted to bring this up on air because I thought it was fascinating, and maybe you have something to add. But in my researching zinc, I found the sacrificial anode on ships. That was raised, kind of in a boating area in Southern California, where there's the docks and just all the fishermen there, and um, there's this zinc block. It's it's basically put on a part of the hull of the ship, and it prevents um, the ship from rusting out from the salt water. And as I was looking into it, zinc has a more negative reduction potential. Like zinc is more negative voltage wise than iron. And so that's how it works. So it'll actually donate electrons, preventing iron from rusting on the complete opposite side of the ship. Like it's a conductive electricity process, which is wild because that has to apply to our bodies. If we have oxidative stress from iron overload, I'd imagine it's copper and zinc helping prevent that corrosion inside of our body.
Don't they also use like a copper infused paint on the bottom of ships' hulls to keep the barnacles from attaching too? So they're using both zinc and copper, aren't they?
Yeah, I think even these sacrificial anodes have some copper in it. It's like a blend of copper and zinc, but I think it's largely mostly zinc. But yeah, they both
Mm.
protect against rust and corrosion. It's so fascinating.
And of course, in the body, they both, what did we just learn? They both lower iron. So they both are protective of iron in the body as well, or protective against iron overload.
hmm Yeah, that's really
It's amazing
interesting.
the synergy.
Yeah, yeah. Between my two full Monty panels, it was 2 years, and I didn't donate between those two tests, and my iron saturation dropped. I think it was 12% just from increasing my copper. And I was slamming raw liver. I was doing like raw bison liver, elk liver, beef liver, all the all the livers, and I think it wasn't until the end so I started to supplement copper. But it's interesting that I lowered my saturation. I mean, I think it went out into my blood because my ferritin shot up. So I liberated the iron from my tissues, and so donating was a good idea.
That's interesting.
Yep.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's a good point you made
Oh,
that it
and I
has a
guess we should
lot of.
conclude with
Yeah, go ahead.
once again, there's really not very many good tests for zinc because it's really located in the muscles and in the bones and stuff. So it's without a good test. Again, I think it's best to test based on your symptoms. What symptoms are you having? Are you having any of the numerous zinc deficiency symptoms we've gone over? Going to your doctor to get a test or I don't trust the full Monty panel to really notice whether or not, like, it's a better test when you discovered you had dry skin and you fixed it almost immediately with zinc. It's a better test. Are you having a runny nose? Are you having congestion? We should be able to sleep at night with our mouth closed or with even tape over our mouth and breathe freely through both nostrils. If you can't, then you need more vitamin C, zinc, and copper. It will take care of it.
Wow, that's really interesting because a lot of people are doing the mouth taping or the nasal dilators, which is like a band-aid for clogged nostrils. And I know if you're not
Mm-hmm.
nose breathing while you sleep, your brain is hypoxic, right? You're not getting even intermittently, even 10 or 15 seconds in the middle of the night. That's 10 or 15 seconds that your brain isn't getting oxygen.
Well, man, it's gotten to the point where I'm so healthy that if I have one nostril close up, it bothers me so much I won't sleep at night at all because I know that's the way it's not supposed to be. Whereas it used to be that was normal for the vast majority of my life before I got healthy. But now it's such a dramatic change. It drives me nuts.
Of those three you mentioned, copper, zinc, and vitamin C, would you say one is more important or they're all equally important for that congestion problem?
That's good. I think zinc is probably the most important one for the congestion problem, but a lot of people, if the trouble is most people are more copper deficient than they are in anything else. Me now, because I'm not copper deficient because I'm on the high copper plan because I wrote the copper book or whatever. Um, for me lately, it's been low zinc causing the problems. But I don't have the problem like hardly ever. So I've got it really well dialed in. So for most people, when they start copper, they say, "Oh, I can breathe so much better now. This is great," and that's because they're mostly copper deficient.
Fascinating. Well, I'll be a good case study. I'm vulnerable, with what I share with people. We all have issues that come and go, and for most of my life, I've had congestion. But what's interesting is it's not throughout the day. So like waking up, I'm good. Throughout the day, I'm good. But it always starts at night. And what's interesting is I noticed over the
Oh,
years
you're
that,
still getting that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Are you still
so
getting that now?
I am, yeah, even with super, super high copper. And so I'm thinking it's probably a zinc and vitamin C deficiency, probably.
Well, since you're
But what
already doing the high copper and zinc, I'll give you another tip, and that is green smoothies. I know you're living out in the boonies and you're not, I don't know how close you are to the nearest grocery or fresh greens, but when I started doing green smoothies, that was the number one thing that cleared out my nose and nasal congestion. And what's been keeping it good lately is making sure that I'm getting enough zinc. But I had a green smoothie today, walked across the street from the hotel and there was a tropical smoothie place there. And so I had access to it and those really work for me too.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll just keep upping my zinc and see if that does it. I did notice I don't drink wine anymore, but I had a just a wine experiment for a couple years, and I'd have just a glass at night, and I noticed that made the congestion worse, which is interesting. Going
There you
back to what you said
go.
about alcohol, right? Depleting copper and zinc, and
Depleting
C, right?
minerals
All
and
three.
being a toxin. It's overloading your liver. Your liver has to process it as a toxin. But what are greens? Greens are very detoxifying.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, yeah, we have quite a few questions, Jason. Did you want to jump into those, or did you have anything else first to go into?
I think I've gone
Um,
through everything in my thing in my notes that I wanted to go through. Oh, zinc. We mentioned sleep, right? We mentioned it very briefly, but taking zinc at night and by itself is a very, very helpful way to make sure that we get good sleep at night. But doesn't mean you can have to avoid taking zinc during the day. So what I do these days, if I'm about to do errands or if I'm just feeling a little stuffy or whatever, boom, 25 milligrams of zinc. I try to take the 50 milligrams of zinc at night, and that's how I get anywhere between 50 to 100 milligrams, depending on how much I've taken during the day.
you're psychic, because the first question was when is the best time of the day to take zinc? So,
There we go. There we go. My my the toric field is strong with this one. So
you must be
the
free
best
of
time of day,
fluoride.
I think, is take zinc on an as needed basis. If your nose is running, if you're having allergies, if you have dry skin, if you have, the symptoms, if you have rashes, take your zinc, break it up in as many times as you can. Because if you really need to take a lot of it first, it's better to take 20 milligrams 5 times a day than to take a 100 milligram dose. And it's better to take it as you need it and then make your symptoms go away. If your symptoms come back, take it as you need it. That way you don't end up taking too much. Um, so taking on an as needed basis or taking zinc at night so that you can sleep is definitely the key.
And we absorb different amounts depending on the form, right? Like that's what I was learning about applying, like your copper sulfate, which is what the 2 ounces, I think 1,182 milligrams, and each drop is a milligram. But we only absorb, it's like 70% of that or something?
I think we absorb about 80% of copper sulfate, and then of like copper glycinate, it's 85% absorbed. But those figures are very weird because if you'll note, they say we only absorb 50% of copper if it's at 1 milligram, and we only absorb 10% of the copper if it's at 10 milligrams. These are wildly differing absorption numbers. So I don't know how they all do their math, but you read the studies and you read enough studies, you see that enough stuff conflicts. So, but even when we only absorb, say, 10% of our copper at 10 milligrams and 90% of it is excreted, how is it excreted? It's excreted through the liver and into the bile. So it had to have gotten absorbed at some point. So how are they even measuring all this? And what the heck do they even mean? People are not very clear when they write their studies because they use their own industry jargon, and it's very hard to decipher what they're saying because I think half the time they don't even know what they're saying.
It's a good point. Yeah, recently I've been reading a lot about ascorbic acid. Carl Pfeiffer and other people in that field of vitamin C therapy, and when you get into the multiple thousands of milligrams, basically it seems conclusive that the more you take at once, the less you absorb. So I think it was like, I don't know, if you take
Yeah, it's
500
like that with
milligrams or
everything.
mhm, same with copper
The
and
more we
zinc.
take, the less we absorb. Same with iodine. 90% of iodine is excreted, and that's what the goal is, to take enough iodine that we're excreting most of it because that's what they consider we finally reach the saturation point. What I find interesting about iodine versus copper in that way is that it takes about a year on the high iodine program of 50 milligrams to reach full body saturation. And on copper, it only takes about a month to reach full saturation where we're excreting 90% of it. So if iodine is safe because we're excreting all of it, also copper is safe because we're excreting it. And nobody ever talks about zinc having an excretion problem. It's only that too much zinc will eliminate copper and create copper deficiency. So once we eliminate our fear of copper, gosh, how much zinc can we really take? So maybe your 300 milligrams of zinc with all the copper you're taking is perfectly safe. I can't really give you any warnings because I don't see any.
Well, I could tell you my hands. I mean, it's interesting reading in your group people's experiences because um, my hands still they'll get discolored if I rub, a couple dropperfuls on my hand. And I think one woman in your group said she got blue hands at first for the first couple of weeks, and then it went away, and she's hasn't had them since. High dosing copper, and so that's it's just interesting to me. Yeah, it's probably a lot of factors playing in, right?
Well, I think once we get the zinc up and once we get the vitamin C up and our collagen formation is good, then we don't have the dry skin problem.
Mm-hmm. And did you say with a year on high iodine to reach full saturation, that was 50 milligrams a day?
That was it. It takes a year to reach full saturation at 12 milligrams a day. It takes about 3 months on iodine at 50 milligrams to reach the full saturation. That's how they settled on 50 milligrams being an acceptable amount because it shouldn't take you a year to fix your mineral deficiency problems. It should only take about 3 months.
Mm-hmm. And I think on your site you reference it's Brownstein, right? He has the iodine protocol.
So the original three iodine doctors were Brownstein, Fleckus, and Abraham. And Abraham has passed away, and Fleckus and Brownstein are both now retired. So it's up to us, the next generation, to keep talking about the high iodine protocol so that it doesn't get lost to history. They did a lot of very great work that's still published at optimox.com. There are about 24 different studies published by Abraham Brownstein and Fleckus that are historic studies that publish historic study results on iodine. In fact, there's one I really ought to highlight for you, and it's this. They gave 3,000 milligrams of iodine to thousands of people, and none of them had any thyroid problems whatsoever. And everyone who warns that iodine will cause thyroid problems, they say that zero point 0.3 milligrams causes the problems. It's only because zero point 0.3 milligrams is a deficiency level. And that same kind of utter nonsense is in the world of copper studies. There's only two studies that I know of where they say copper is a toxin because they gave people copper. One study, they only gave them the equivalent of zero point 0.1 milligram of copper. And the other study, they gave them 3 milligrams of copper. But they also paired that copper with known neurotoxic fats. And then they blamed all of the neurotoxic damage on the high levels of copper when it was clearly the neurotoxic fats that they did. So they create these slanderous studies on very low amounts, and then they claim that copper is the toxin when clearly that's not the case.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I found the research tab on that website, Optimox. It's interesting. Optimal
Oh,
levels of iodine
yes,
for
no, read all
greatest
of that.
mental and physical. Yeah.
That's You read all of that. That's some of the best health research anywhere. It's fascinating. You'll never be scared of iodine after you get through that.
Wow. Yeah, and earlier I was just reminded I wanted to ask you about B vitamins, and I think people, even though we're going off the rails from zinc for a minute, I think people find it interesting. And you like B1, 2, 3, 5, what is it, 12? You avoid B6, right? Because you said you were reading that's a nerve toxin, I think.
So too much B6 is a nerve toxin, and various governments have created various different, very differing limits for B6 toxicity. The UK's limit is 10 milligrams, and in a lot of B complex supplements, you can get 50 milligrams of B6, and B6 can be noted as a toxin at even 20, which is why some governments have lowered it all the way down to 10. So yeah, I mean, I'm taking copper and iodine. Why? Because they're both very good for the nerves. But every now and then I'd have a little bit of peripheral neuropathy, and it could have been because I was taking too many B vitamins. And in fact, my Ultra Mag, which was a combination of 5 different forms of magnesium, also had B6 in it because B6 is good for the heart, don't you know? And so I was double overdosing myself on B6 from the B complex I had, which had 50, and then another 30 milligrams in the Ultramag. So I had to put a stop to that, and sure enough, all the peripheral neuropathy symptoms went away, and I feel a lot better. So when you learn more, you do better. And so now I'm no longer using. There is a B6. There are B complexes out there with no B6. Um, but I decided to buy all the bees individually, and I also didn't buy folate or folic acid because there's a lot of controversy over that one because um, folate is supposedly supposed to prevent birth defects, but if you get over 800 milligrams of folate, it can actually cause birth defects. So what's going on there? And one of the problems of folate is that it masks a B12 deficiency, and the masking is like the tests end up not working. Where have we heard that before? So if they try to test for B12, the tests don't work if folate is there because it fixes the shape of the blood cells or something like that. So, but the point is, high folate can cause birth defects. So, and folate is also one of those things that's fortified in all of our food supply everywhere. So I don't think we might be able to get away with not having any folate. And so one of the things I'm paying attention to is, are we developing, severe tiredness? That could be a deficiency symptom of folate, but I'm only tired because I work out in the gym a lot, and generally speaking, I'm not tired. So um, I think I'm fine. Yeah, but
I think so
yeah,
too.
we're taking B1, B2, B3, B5, B7, and B12. Those are the ones I've tried to settle at, and I'm looking carefully to see if we develop any folate deficiency symptoms.
Yeah, I think since our last interview, you brought up, I think in that interview, was it Abram Hoffer and was it the CIA LSD mind control experiments? We're going down the rabbit hole. And I actually found a cool Abram Hoffer lecture on YouTube. I think it's 2 hours long. And I was watching that the other day, and it was fascinating. He was talking about, he's all about high dose niacin. And he was talking about how he has seen that cure schizophrenia multiple times. Like, this girl was like hearing voices in her head, and then she found a magazine article that said niacin for schizophrenia, and so she started experimenting, and she got up to like 60 milligrams of niacin a day, and the voices in her head stopped. I thought that was an interesting story.
Well, niacin is a very good detoxifier. The problem with niacin is that it also lowers copper. And these guys were anti-copper advocates. Um, if you look up their Wikipedia pages, it mentions that that they did the LSD experiments, that they worked for the CIA. They were promoting and taking LSD. And if they're taking LSD, they're literally inducing a schizophrenia in themselves. So you could see why they would then devote their studies to curing schizophrenia that they had induced in themselves. And so niacin is a general detoxifier. So let's not go a little too crazy with our experiments and create, uh, you know, schizophrenia in ourselves. But I think our experiments are a lot wiser than what they ever did. But also, we're not being led by the CIA. We're being led by reason and logic, and what works.
Yeah, so you're not putting drops of LSD in your copper sulfate. No, I'm just kidding.
I am not. I am not. I I will admit on the air to having taken LSD once in my 30s.
Yeah, was that the 70s? The
Oh yeah, oh, I'm that old. I was born. I was born in 1970. So
I thought all the copper you're anti-aging. So did you and Jennifer ever do the niacin flush? Because isn't it like, it's like niacin, trampoline, sauna? It's like the protocol.
so there is a niacin and sauna detox protocol. I've never followed it. Jennifer followed that for a full 30 days. She liked it. It definitely did a lot of cleansing for her. She likes it. There were some problems with it though. I think they have you take a lot of calcium. She didn't do the calcium. I thought the calcium would be a little excessive. Um, they only take you up to 10 milligrams of copper, and only towards the end of the whatever 3 to 6 weeks or whatever, as they scale up the minerals. Um, I think they also include manganese, which could be a neurotoxin. I don't trust manganese as a supplement. I don't take manganese. Um, Things like that. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. This is a good one that we didn't talk about. Hopefully this episode doesn't get flagged. I think we're beyond the censorship a little bit, but
The
Does zinc
censors,
really
they
help?
can't watch this far into it, so they don't know what we're talking about at this point, right?
Right. Does zinc really help with the loss of smell? I actually experienced
I
that
think
for just a
so.
couple hours, but uh, I use methylene blue and that knocked it out.
Did you take so much zinc that it knocked out your smell? Is that what you're saying?
Well, when I had COVID twice, the first time I
Oh,
had it, I lost my smell and taste for it was like an hour, and then the second time around, I lost it for like a couple hours. But I wasn't taking any zinc um, or much copper back then. I just slammed the methylene blue. I think I was doing like 60 milligrams
and
at
that
least a
fixed it.
day of methylene blue. Hmm.
That's great. Okay. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
but
I had when I had zinc deficiency, I don't think my smeller was working very good, and it had gotten better after I started taking zinc again.
hmm, interesting. Let me see. Does zinc regulate excessive DHT and stop hair loss?
Zinc is indeed associated with stopping hair loss, but I don't know if it affects DHT directly or whether it's another mechanism. Often hair loss can happen with dry skin or seborrheic dermatitis is what they call it, right? It's like a rash that people get, it's kind of like a dandruff. Zinc should be stopping things like that. But again, zinc is only part of the issue. It can fix both, but we also need to eliminate the toxins that are the cause or the root cause of rashes in the first place. The skin is an elimination organ, just like our other elimination organs. So if things are backing up, or if we have too many toxins, the toxins will come out in the skin. So it's all about detoxifying and keeping the colon clear and things like that. When then we shouldn't have those other problems. Jennifer actually had a rash on her head for 10 years straight, and we did everything we could to eliminate the rash on her head, and nothing was working. And I was absolutely surprised until finally one day I was watching Andrew Saul and his vitamin things, and it gets to the end and he says, you guys have to stop all of your artificial colors because they can, cause all sorts of things, including hair loss and seborrheic dermatitis. And I'm like, oh. So or maybe it's something like that. No, it was probably not that, but I just learned that, yes, okay, let's just stop all these. They're bad for you. So I told Jennifer we have to stop it. So we stopped, and it was 10 days later, her 10-year scalp condition cleared up because she kind of had a fondness for some artificially flavored candies as well as, spicy chips. You can't go and find some red hot spicy potato chips in a gas station that's not colored with artificial red dye number 40. Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, and I think they put it in a lot of sodas too, right? Like even the sodas in glass
Well,
bottles, like I think Fanta or whatever. Yeah.
maybe some red sodas. Yeah, almost any red food coloring. Well, and then the other funny thing is that the guy who wrote his book on vitamin A toxicity, he said if people are switching from these food dyes, then they're going over to these natural dyes. Well, a lot of the natural dyes are beta carotene type dyes, which are not necessarily healthier because they will also cause the same skin rashes, believe it or not, because they're toxins. The body treats them as a toxin, and where do toxins go? They show up as skin rashes. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Interesting. um, we had a question here, Jason. What are the best absorbed forms of zinc? Uh, would you say there are any forms to avoid, like that don't work or ineffective? Or
Well, didn't you discover that the picolinate was not as good? Did you tell
well,
me
yeah,
that? People have
I
said
think
that.
Chris Masterjohn has an interesting video on that, and I think he was going off HTMA though, hair tissue mineral analysis, which I question
Okay.
the accuracy of
Yeah.
that.
I
Um,
question the accuracy of that too. Yeah, I don't put much trust. I don't put much trust in that or blood tests. There's no good tests. We go by symptoms. We have a zinc glycinate. The glycinate and the bisglycinate were very common for copper. It's very common for magnesium, and I just assumed it was going to be fine, and I've had no problems. I would assume that a zinc sulfate actually would be totally fine too, just like copper sulfate is fine. Often we have the least toxicity to sulfates because sulfate is itself a detoxifier. People who are mercury toxic end up having trouble with sulfates, but you need to have a clear sulfur pathway. Sulfur is a very important detoxifier. Most people have a third of a pound of sulfur in their bodies. Sulfur is not the toxic agent, it's the mercury that's the toxic agent. And we need to probably work on making sure that we're mercury free first. And in fact, people who have over successfully and overcome their mercury toxicity then learn to tolerate sulfurs. It's not that you need to tolerate sulfurs, you need to get your sulfur detox pathways working. Stephanie Seneff of MIT has done an enormous amount of work on that. And we don't just need sulfur, but we need sulfur transporters like berries and coffee and dark beer to make sure that the sulfur actually gets successfully transported around the body so it can do its detoxification work.
Interesting. Well, I got the coffee covered, so.
Yeah, there we go. And I don't drink the beer, so that leaves the berries and coffee for me.
We had a question. Does zinc increase sperm count? And there's actually a study. Zinc is an essential element for male fertility, 2018, and yeah, basically says it does increases sperm motility and quality and all of that. Have you looked into that rabbit hole? Or?
I haven't looked into that, but I do know that it is good for fertility and boosting testosterone. I do know, of course, our whole society is suffering from lower sperm counts, and we're also as a society we're suffering from toxicity. And these minerals that detoxify, zinc and copper, are very, very important.
This is a really interesting one, Jason. As a guy that used to roast like a lobster in the sun in California, does topical zinc in mineral sunscreen affect whole body mineral balance? I guess another way of saying, does rubbing zinc sunscreen on your skin improve your copper status?
So that's an interesting question, and whole body mineral status. I believe you probably can absorb copper through the skin or zinc through the skin, just like you can absorb copper. Jennifer and I, we had a little experiment one time where we took zinc before we went tanning, and we burned significantly. And so it could have been the temporary zinc blocking the copper effect. Usually, when we have our copper up, we don't burn at all. So we looked at that and were kind of shocked. And it was just a matter of taking one zinc pill right before we went tanning and had that effect. So that's something to consider. And then, of course, there is a zinc oxide that, is a white paste that people use to put on their skin directly when they get sunburn or use as a sun protector. But that has a drawback because if it's lower in copper in the skin, could create a rebound effect where you're actually more sensitive to getting sunburn in the future. So if people are using zinc oxide, and I know ski racers used to do it, and I know lifeguards do it, you need to balance that out with some copper internally so that that zinc doesn't overpower it.
Is it a myth that taking large doses of zinc helps with COVID? Yeah, have you seen that? Anyone use that and the benefits without
I'm going to pass on
copper?
that question. Let's not get into that. I'll just say, I think if you take so much zinc that you're depleting copper, that's a mistake because we need copper for the lungs for quite a few reasons. So I'm more into keeping the minerals in balance than just taking zinc I think taking zinc for COVID is a mistake. I'll put it that way.
How about this one? Are white spots on the nails a sign of zinc deficiency?
I would agree with that. They probably are, but it's maybe not a very good sign. I don't know. I don't get them at all. I don't have them at all. And yet I was zinc deficient because I know that I was having runny nose and allergies this spring. And when I would take zinc, those went away. I was having a little bit of low libido issues. I took more zinc and that went away. So there are other signs, but that could be a valid sign, but it just wasn't a valid sign for me. And maybe that's because copper was fixing those white spots in my nails, or maybe boron, or maybe iodine was fixing it. So
this is a really interesting one, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Uh, is it true that based on if zinc gives you a metallic taste or not, it tells you that your body needs it?
that's an interesting one. I had read that one when I first was zinc deficient, and I was playing around with it. Um, I think it's supposed to, what is it? If you can't taste the zinc, then you're zinc deficient, and if you can, then you're sufficient. And what we did in my whole house is I couldn't taste the zinc at all, and I was deficient. And only one person in the whole household, my youngest, Hayden, when he was about 5, thought it was horribly yucky. So, but I don't put, but here's the thing with copper sulfate. Some people think copper sulfate is sweet. Other people think it is bitter. I'm like, what, sweet? No, you're kidding me. It's horribly bitter. So I don't put too much faith in whether how it tastes on whether or not you're deficient. The best way is to go by actual deficiency symptoms by learning what zinc actually does. When we know that zinc improves testosterone, you can get a testosterone measure, but you can also test testosterone through looking at your libido. Is your sex drive high? If your sex drive is high, you probably don't have a zinc deficiency. If your sex drive is waning, you are more likely to have a zinc deficiency.
This is a kind of esoteric one that's fun. Ask him to talk about the old notion of zinc being the male mineral and copper the female. We had someone else ask, what planet is zinc related to? Have you looked into any of the weird stuff about zinc?
So I don't put credence in that either because we're all human and we all need both. Some people say that women are more susceptible to copper toxicity because estrogen leads to more copper, and I think that's completely false. Um, People who talk about IUDs and the copper IUDs causing copper toxicity, that's false because not nearly enough copper can come off of that IUD to create problems. It's creating an artificial pregnancy raises estrogen. That's the problem. And estrogen raises copper because estrogen is a pregnancy hormone, and pregnant women need to have copper in their blood to let it get to the baby because babies have desperate needs for copper because babies have 10 times more copper in their bodies per pound than adults do. And that is a sound refutation of copper toxicity because babies are not born copper toxic. Babies are some of the healthiest cohort of all human beings. Kids suffer from the least amount of diseases. Um, I think the only reason why babies suffer a lot is probably because they're assaulted by the medical establishment so regularly. And then when kids reach about age 5, they're no longer so regularly assaulted by the medical establishment. And it's really 5-year-olds that have the lowest mortality of all age groups of all humans. I was very happy when
Wow.
my kids reached age 5. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I was a teacher's aide and a substitute teacher at juvenile hall for 4 years, and I just always think back to I was out there for PE class with the kids, and I'll just never forget them like running around doing laps, and I look up and it's just tic-tac-toe chemtrails in the sky, and then they're going back in and drinking tap water and eating their little packaged meals for lunch, and there's pregnant girls in there, just had a baby, and I'm just like, this is really sad. I mean, these kids are so malnourished and poisoned. It's ridiculous.
So, do you ever see any chemtrails above your house? You're living way out in the boonies, right? Where are you living? Can you even say?
North Idaho, yeah, almost to Canada, and yeah, actually almost every day. But I think sometimes there will be some months off. But then again, I hear they just spray at night sometimes. They just switch it up, and at night you can't see them, right? So
Oh, it's
it's
red nights. You can't even see the chemtrails. Oh, that's a good one.
And that's part of my case for supplementation because I have anti-supplementers on my show, or I've talked to them, or they're on social media or whatever, and friends, and I'm just like, look, this is just one more case for supplementation. I mean, you're not going to counter poisoning like
That's
that
right.
with food alone. Okay.
That's right. We live in an artificial world. Babies are assaulted with 600 toxins. Good thing they get copper.
Yep. And you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but best food sources for zinc. So you said beans, right, is one.
So oysters are out. Actually, they're the highest in zinc, and they do have positive effects. But they're so loaded with toxins. I'll want to cross them off the list. So really, it's beef. You can get about I got 5 milligrams in a serving or a typical serving, and because I'm a big guy, I usually measure my beef in pounds, not ounces. You know, so what is it, like something like 5 milligrams and 3 ounces of beef? But I'm always eating like Oh, I will order the bag of burgers, please. 5 of them. I'll give one to my dog, and I'll eat 4 hamburgers myself. Um, and then the second one is probably, yeah, beans. So what's interesting is that the low vitamin A diet from Grant Genero is uh, beef, beans, and rice, which are high zinc foods. And zinc makes that, what is it, the retinol binding protein. So it's interesting. People pick their poisons, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Seeing if there's any other questions here. Yeah, another one on symptoms. The size of the moons on your fingernails, is that affected by zinc levels?
I don't notice really any very many changes of the moons on my fingernails. I have several fingernails with no moons and some with moons. I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of moons on this one, right? But on this hand, I have no moons. So, or I have a moon there on that one. And it's been that way for years. So I don't know if that's a very good indicator of anything.
Yeah, I've heard B vitamins, because people they diagnose by the nails, the ridges, the white spots, the moons. And I've heard B vitamins play a big role in our nails.
Yeah, I don't look at nails much of it as a symptom at all of anything. I haven't really put too much credence in that. I think there are nail readers who come up with these ideas, and I haven't found that to be too reliable. I think the nails grow very slowly, whereas you can
Hmm.
develop nasal symptoms extremely fast.
Hmm. Why do I get headaches from taking zinc? I'm gonna ask.
When people start detoxifying minerals and vitamins, they can develop headaches often because they're just stirring up so many toxins. And I think the answer is that the more different supplements you take that are detoxifiers, they all sort of help each other. One of the solutions for iodine headache is salt, and one of the solutions for the copper headache is vitamin C. I don't know why. I just know that that's what happens. Um, People in my forum who forget to take the vitamin C often will develop those headaches. And I say, well, try the vitamin C because you haven't been doing all of it. And then they try the vitamin C, and then they're like, oh, my headache went away in minutes. How did you do that? I'm like, well, thank you. You know,
Do you think maybe sweating in a sauna could help to kind of push out those liberated metals?
probably. Making sure you're going poop enough, right? Uh, When I was a, I've always wanted to write the health book called Go Poop Enough and Lose 5 Pounds Diet Plan or something like that. I mean, there's so many people are so constipated that they really just need to, I don't know, take a laxative or take more copper or take more vitamin C and get the thing moving. When they say open up your detox pathways, I'll tell you, most of the toxins they come out in the poop. So make sure you're pooping. Constipation is really, really unhealthy. So a lot of people they ask questions like, well, can I take these things while I'm breastfeeding? I'm worried about toxins coming out of my milk. No, toxins don't come out in the milk; they come out in the poop.
I wonder if a lot of people just aren't retaining magnesium, right? With the boron deficiency and
That's
copper
what I
too, right?
think.
Because
Copper and boron are very, very seldom taken. And what else is going to help us hold on to magnesium? So I think probably, if most people are suffering from boron and copper deficiency, then yeah, they're probably having magnesium retention problems, which sort of explains why
constipation.
people are over enamored with taking so much magnesium.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Well, that was all the questions, Jason. This was a lot of fun. I knew it would be, and I'm sure it's a continued discussion. I like your just experimental mind and that you're willing to experiment and change. That's admirable and someone that's you know chronologically older. So
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so very much. I have enjoyed this discussion again, and thanks for having me back. Um, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, and your website's revealingfraud.com, and you have a lot of great blog posts up there and resources, right?
Thank you. I have written a lot more blog posts since I publish my book because I'm learning so much in the forum and in the feedback. And in fact, I think I have to thank you for having me on your show the first time. I had only about 300 or 400 people in my forum when you had me on the show the first time. I mean, talk about an early adopter. You adopted me so early. Now we're up to in the forum in just a couple of months now from then. Now we're up to 3.6 thousand people. So that's been fun to watch that growth happen. And I'm spending almost all my days answering all these questions in the forum. And I'm so glad to see you post there on occasion. And I was so glad to help you find your way into the Zinc as part of the protocol. It was in there in the quick start guide all along. But I'm so very glad that you found your way back into that. And how much vitamin C are you taking? That's the other part of my protocol. How much vitamin C are you taking?
Yeah, so Jason, you're opening up a can of worms here with this question, but so I
Yes,
actually
let's
sell a
do
whole.
it. We have 7 minutes left.
So I actually sell a whole. I have a supplement company, Mitolife, and I sell whole food vitamin C, which I've been taking for years since discovering Morley's work and studying the tyrosinase thing and the bioflavonoids. But you had me look into Andrew Saul, Carl Pfeiffer. I think Abram Hoffer has some material that he did on vitamin C. I'd known about Doris Lowe for several years, so I revisited her, who says that vitamin C is ascorbic acid. They're synonymous terms, and there's no such thing as whole food vitamin C in the clinical literature. It doesn't exist. And so she also said that ascorbic acid's a redox balancer. It's not just an antioxidant. And so she said it's like our primary redox balancer in the body, that reduction in oxidation, that donating and accepting electrons. She said that's all orchestrated, like vitamin C is the conductor of that orchestra, of that redox orchestra. So I've been just meditating on that. Obviously, vitamin C is needed to make dopamine. They often say it's just for the adrenals, but it's also needed for brain function and dopamine, which I think a lot of people are just dopamine deficient. So yeah, just been having fun diving in. And to answer your question directly, I've just been experimenting with it. I feel comfortable now that copper's coming in, taking it. Whereas if I didn't have any copper coming in, I would be skeptical, like all the people the last 2 years taking ascorbic acid without copper for COVID. I think that's a mistake. Because copper's part of that, orchestra for immune system and energy and all that. So yeah, been just experimenting. I've tried like 500 to 1,000 milligrams every hour or whenever I remember. And from what I've researched, it's more about frequent doses than all at once. Like we talked about earlier, the absorption. I think, if you took 5 grams of AA, ascorbic acid, you only absorb like, I don't know, 10%. Like basically the more you take, the less you absorb in one dose. But if someone has a cold or fever or something, their tolerance goes way up for it, which I found fascinating, where they could take 100 milligrams all at once and have no bowel dump. So it's interesting that our needs for vitamin C go up with infections and things. So yeah, I've just been having fun looking into it with like a childlike curiosity and an open mind, and just having a greater perspective of it. But I don't think whole food vitamin C is bad. I just think is the active component that 2 atoms of copper, or is it ascorbic acid in the whole food C? I would imagine it's the ascorbic acid. And I think you might have pointed out that it's a lot more expensive to take the food-based form. You're doing just berry powders and trying to get up to 1,000 milligrams of ascorbic acid. That's quite a bit of whole food C versus just taking the isolate.
And there could be other cofactors in the whole food C, in the plant nutrients, besides just the lysine and the copper. I mean, I'm not saying the whole food C is bad. It's just expensive. And for my own needs, I think I would rather do the ascorbic acid. I think you covered the whole gamut of material there very well. I agree with you on just about everything. So I think I'll let you have the last word on that. Think that was all very good. I think you made a very good point that ascorbic acid gets a lot safer with the copper that we're taking because we're not depleting our copper, and we're so far ahead of our forebears, right? The Hoffer, the late Hoffer and Pfeiffer, who were advocates of C, I suppose, but were not fans of copper. They didn't understand, I guess, what they were doing, or maybe they did. Who knows? But I think we're doing it better, and that's the point. When you know better and learn better, we do better, and I think we're doing really good.
I agree. Yeah, it's really fun to experiment and connect these dots because someone has to experiment, right? Instead of just reading these people's material and just being, an anti-copper advocate like they were. It's like, no, how about we combine the information, take what's good, leave the rest, and create a new thing, which you're
That's
kind of
right.
doing with.
Well, you just complimented me for having an open mind, and look at you and your open mind looking into this again. And also, given the fact you're selling Whole Foods C, there's a potential conflict of interest right there. And I trapped you. I didn't know that I was going to trap you because I don't look at what you're selling. Um, so well done, Matt. Well done.
I appreciate it. I mean, I would say if someone's not on your protocol or not on copper sulfate or not taking more than 10 milligrams of copper, they'd probably be better off with Whole Food C. But if they are upping their copper to, let's say, 50, 100 milligrams, they might need more than Whole Food C or something in addition to.
Yeah, that's basically my position too. If we're taking a ton of copper, it can induce some headaches, and we need more detoxing power. And maybe Whole Foods C, you could get there if your pocketbook was big enough. You didn't mind spending $10, $20 a day on it, because I really think 1,000 milligrams is almost the bare bones of vitamin C. In fact, I've experimented with how little vitamin C I can get away with. And if we did 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C every fifth day, and I was getting little micro bleeds on my hands, so my collagen formation was a little off. And they say that's one of the problems of copper toxicity is that it can induce a scurvy like symptom because it could overpower the vitamin C. So if we're taking a lot of this copper, we need to have the vitamin C. I did a lot better with vitamin C, 1,000 milligrams every day. But just because it's better doesn't mean it's ideal. So I've been experimenting with more because I've been able to, let's say, uh, not be so intimidated by Morley's view that C will block our copper because I'm taking so much copper. Since I'm taking so much copper, I can handle more of the antagonists. But it's not really an antagonist because vitamin C has at least 15 different synergies with copper. They both make collagen, they both kill germs, they both boost our immune system. uh, they're both great for the blood supply. They're both great for our circulation. um, when things are in synergy, it kind of explains the antagonism, because if we need both vitamin C and copper to do something in the body, and if copper was the lagging ingredient and it's no longer the lagging ingredient, then vitamin C is going to be the lagging ingredient that we're going to run out of faster with our normal metabolic processes. So it's not about finding the maximum copper we can take with the minimum zinc and minimum vitamin C that avoid deficiencies. We want to take the optimal amount of copper, the optimal amount of zinc, the optimal amount of vitamin C. So uh, so my optimal ranges right now are roughly, say, 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C, 30 milligrams of oral copper, 70 milligrams of topical copper, and anywhere between, say, 50 to 100 milligrams of zinc. That's where I'm at. And it might change. I might change.
Yeah. How many
Yeah.
dropperfuls does that amount to, Jason, of copper, the 70 milligrams? Do you know how many roughly of the copper sulfate
I
dropperfuls
don't
is?
go a full dropper. I do like about a three-quarter of the dropper or half the dropper in the palm of my hand, which is about, I guess, is about 7 drops. Because if I put 10 drops in the palm of my hand, I'm going to spill some on the floor. So about my palm can only hold about 7, and I put my two palms together and then I slap it on the body, and I count maybe roughly 10 of those. So that's why I say 70. But it's very sloppy and it's very quick, and I'm guessing it's rough. I just apply it everywhere. Go fast.
Right, right. Well, yeah, those are great points you made. And yeah, my next rabbit hole I want to dive into is ceruloplasmin activity, its relationship to ascorbic acid, because there's ceruloplasmin level or amount in your body, but then there's the activity, which is you can only measure that in Spain and Europe. Morley said it's like illegal to look at the activity in the U.S. So I'm curious, but
That's why.
I know it could get too high and get out of balance, and that actually causes, I think, psychosis and some mental problems if ceruloplasmin gets too high. So it's all about keeping things in range. So.
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because since the last show, I began to look into ceruloplasmin too, and I found that ceruloplasmin is often very high in people with arthritis, and I had and recovered from arthritis. So, as a marker, is high always good? Maybe not. That's very interesting, and I don't know why it's high in people with arthritis. I just know that it can be, and I know arthritis is not a very healthy state. So, is high ceruloplasmin always associated with increased health? And the answer is maybe not. On the other hand, the body is a very wise machine, and it could very well be that when we have arthritis, the body has such a great need for copper, the body is wisely increasing ceruloplasmin high, so that when we do get copper, it will make sure that it goes where it needs to go. We don't know whether or not ceruloplasmin is bad just because it's high in a bad state. Very, very difficult to study these things. It's often we only just know tiny glimpses of information, and the interpretation, you have to look at whether or not it can be interpreted in either a bad way or good way, and consider both possibilities. And it can be open-minded to all the possibilities, rather than just getting a one-sided view on things.
That's awesome. I love it. That's a good place to close out. And so I'll put the links to all Jason's stuff below. It's revealingfraud.com. That's a great hub where you can find his first book, Beyond the Arthritis Fix, his new book, The Copper Revolution, the Facebook group where you can ask questions and see people's experiences. And thanks so much, Jason. We got to do this again. It's always really fun chatting with you.
Thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed being on the show. You're wonderful. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. All right, stick around as we close out. Well, that wraps up today's show. Hope you guys got some interesting information out of that. I like bringing context to the discussion of health with this podcast, and I find that that's lacking in a lot of health information. Staying open-minded to nuance has really helped me in my understanding of human health. And not everybody has to take 100 milligrams of copper a day. He's just shining a light on the safety of increasing our copper intake. And that's a very modest amount. As he said at the start of the show, it's when that metallothionein gets overwhelmed that copper toxicity kicks in. And that's between 5,000 and 10,000 milligrams. So that's a far cry from 100 milligrams. And since our last talk, I've been just meditating on the idea that you can create a copper deficiency by eating oysters. So you can create imbalances from eating whole foods. And back to what I told Jason about the cattle and the liver biopsy that was done on cattle in Texas and having minimal to no copper in their liver. We really don't know unless we have the farm ourselves. And as I mentioned, that is the goal. We need more people that are learning about how to grow food. I'm really excited to learn about it with my geodesic growing domes from the company Growing Spaces. I'm sure that through that process of learning about soil chemistry and mineral balancing, that I'll connect some dots with human health. But that takes time, right? I just didn't roll out of bed one morning and start a fully off-grid homestead with goats and chickens and growing fruits and vegetables and doing it right with being sure that the plants are getting sufficient copper, and even going beyond. Like, I'm going to experiment with lodestones in the soil to increase the voltage because there is an electrical process occurring at the soil level. So my view is, whether it's growing fruits or vegetables or animal husbandry, having cattle to process into meat or any animal to process into meat, I think we could do things better. And I don't think there are enough people out there that are experimenting and pushing the envelope with innovative new ways. And I'm not talking about hydroponics or the creepy things that they're doing, growing plants in large indoor buildings. I'm talking about small scale farms, homesteads. I found it really fascinating that bicarbonate uses up zinc. That blew my mind. That makes me want to look into that further, because I was slamming magnesium bicarbonate for several years and avoiding zinc like the plague. And yes, I was eating red meat, but I was not carnivore. Maybe a steak a day, maybe ground beef once a day. But if you're correcting let's just say, for example, in my case, a 30-year deficiency, I question whether you can do that with food. So I think there's a lot more to research with the relationship with metallothionein and zinc and copper, and just the power of, as Jason said, the different metallothioneins. He said it's a family of enzymes. And also looking into this ceruloplasmin connection with zinc. The more I research zinc, I find that it works together with copper. They don't oppose each other like enemies. You need both. Just like I mentioned, the sacrificial anode on a ship. They work together to prevent corrosion. And I'd imagine that it works exactly the same way in the human body. So I really appreciate what Jason Hommel is doing. We don't agree on the vitamin A thing, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. I don't think we should agree with everyone on everything, and that breeds new discoveries. And as long as we're staying respectful, not going to character attacks, which a lot of people tend to do, I think we can get some constructive learning happening here. His website is revealingfraud.com. That's where you can get his book called The Copper Revolution. He has an arthritis fix book and the Facebook group called Copper Revolution, where you can ask questions and share your experience with increasing your copper intake. And on that website, revealingfraud.com, he actually has a lot of great blog posts. He has a ton of them, actually. And if you're new to a lot of this information, that might be a good place to start, especially the quick start guide, Copper Quick Start Guide on his website is very useful if you're interested in experimenting with this copper thing. And I would recommend, if you're not taking copper, you should not take zinc, because you will create a copper deficiency. It's a little tricky to not go by tests, because people are all about testing, plasma, the blood tests, the HTMAs, the hair tissue mineral analysis tests, and everyone wants to find the numbers. And maybe someday we're going to be able to look in the tissue. Maybe they already have that technology. It's just being kept from us. I would not be surprised at all if that was the case. But as it stands now, we can't look into the liver without it being very painful and seeing what the liver stores of copper are, or of the fat soluble vitamins are. So maybe someday we'll have access to that and we'll be able to do that. But until then, I tend to agree with Jason that besides iron, I highly recommend the Full Monty Iron Panel, because you can see a lot of different markers, and it is useful, even if it's a few times a year, to look for trends in your iron saturation, your transferrin, all of the different iron markers. But when it comes to everything else, it's really difficult to get a picture of what's going on. As he mentioned, low plasma zinc does not necessarily mean that you're zinc deficient. So we didn't get a manual on how the human body works, and they've made it purposefully complicated for us to try to get us on the pharmaceutical hamster wheel. So we're really figuring all this out for ourselves. And I think we need pioneers like Jason Hommel out there that are experimenting and pushing the limits of what's possible. We didn't talk about Shilajit in the show. I really want to get Jason some Mitolife Panacea and see how he feels on it. I really think that Shilajit is the missing link for a lot of people's health because it's just extremely balancing. You're getting calcium, magnesium, potassium, all of the trace minerals and ultra trace minerals and likely substances that we've not discovered yet, all combined with that fulvic acid. And fulvic acid isolated, in my opinion, is not the way to go, but to take the whole food substance, which is the Shilajit resin, which contains other compounds like D-benzo alpha pyrones and many other things. It's a symphony of nutrients that are working together to create a profound effect on someone's health. And on that topic, I will say that Mitolife Panacea did recently return back in stock. You can find that at mitolife.co. And I think as of this recording, it might be out, or maybe it'll come back in. But I would recommend just checking. And if you happen to be on social media, on Instagram, we announce it on the Mitolife Instagram page whenever it's back in stock. And we recently were able to finally get a shipment in from Russia. And that's been a whole lot of work because of the current world events. But that is easily one of my top 5 favorite supplements. If I only had to pick 5, that would be one of them. I take 5 tablets, which is 1 gram, with my breakfast after I eat breakfast. And sometimes I'll take it later in the day, but every day I'll take 5 tablets. Maybe I'll take a day off here or there just to see if I feel a difference. But it is definitely an energy booster, a mental clarity booster, and just an overall energizer for the entire system. And my website is matt-blackburn.com. You can find all of my recommended products up there, as well as my updated CLF protocol with my new information that I've discovered about vitamin A protecting from lipid peroxidation. I want to give a shout out to my favorite red light therapy company. They're called Gemba Red, and they just released a new overclocked body light. So it's a full body light panel that contains both red and near infrared LED lights. And what I really appreciate about Andrew, the owner that I've had on my podcast a few times, he really dives deep into the literature on red light therapy and debunks so many myths on his YouTube channel. He gets really, really technical with it. And he actually posted today that the common wavelengths for red light therapy devices, you'll notice, is 630 nanometers and 850 nanometers. But 660 nanometers and ones that they actually don't usually use in popular, well-marketed red light therapy devices, they're not using those wavelengths. I think his device really helped me through the winter here in northern Idaho, where there's not a lot of light, not only UV light, but just light in general. I feel like it really helped to keep me going so I could jump back on my tractor and clear my driveway of snow. It definitely helped to keep me energized. So thank you guys for listening. There's a new episode released every Friday. Check out the Mitolife Academy. I put a lot of time and energy into that. That's my private YouTube membership. If you sign up for the advanced tier, you get 4 private videos a month. And if you sign up for basic, you get 1 video and the live Q&A once a month. And if you sign up now, you get access to all of the previous videos, which I think is approaching 2 years now of a lot of information. Some people would call it biohacking tips. But it's way more than that. I'm not just plugging affiliate links. I'm talking about minerals in depth, whether it's sodium or potassium or copper or zinc or the top EMF mitigation that is beyond the energy devices that I recommend. Just a lot of fun stuff. And the Q&As are always cool the last day of the month because I talk about my latest research and I get to connect with members and answer questions that they have. And it's just a whole lot of fun. So check that out and stay tuned for the next episode that's released every Friday here on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I will see you guys next week. Stay supercharged.